Leo was a ghost long before he became a monster. He haunted the edges of his own life, a talented comic book artist whose crippling shyness rendered him invisible. For one night, he just wanted to be seen, to be someone else. He found the perfect face in a dusty antique shop, a smooth, white porcelain mask with an enigmatic smile. It promised confidence, a new identity. But when the party ended, the mask remained. It had fused to his skin, and the face he chose for a night was now his forever, a parasitic persona feeding on his soul, erasing the man beneath. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. The city noise was a constant, dull roar outside Leo's third-floor apartment, a symphony of sirens, distant arguments, and the perpetual hiss of traffic on wet asphalt. Inside, the only sound was the scratch of his pen against Bristol board. His apartment, which doubled as his studio, was a cluttered sanctuary of his own making. Stacks of comics leaned precariously against walls, action figures stood sentinel on his monitors, and half-finished pages of his own work were scattered across every available surface. Here, amidst the organized chaos of his own creation, Leo was a god. He could birth heroes with jawlines of steel and heroines who moved with impossible grace. He could ink sprawling cityscapes and craft villains whose shadows stretched for miles. On paper, he was limitless. In the real world, Leo was a ghost. At 26, he had mastered the art of becoming background noise. His talent was undeniable. His portfolio was filled with dynamic, emotionally resonant art that screamed with a voice he could never find in his own throat. But his shyness was a physical presence, a heavy cloak that smothered him in any social setting. He saw himself as utterly unremarkable, a mess of brown hair that never quite behaved, a frame that was too lanky, and a face he considered hopelessly plain. His art was his only real outlet, the only place where the vibrant, confident person he wished he could be was allowed to breathe. The text message had been sitting on his phone for 3 days, a glowing rectangle of pure anxiety. It was from Chloe. "Huge Halloween party at Mark's place Saturday. You have to come. No excuses this time, Leo." Chloe. She was the one person who saw past the ghost. His best friend since college, she was everything he wasn't. Effervescent, fearless, and effortlessly social. She loved his art, championed his talent, and was perpetually trying to drag him out of his shell. He was also hopelessly in love with her, a fact he'd guarded with the same fierce, silent dedication he gave to his most personal sketches. The idea of her seeing him at a party, watching him stammer, or worse, stand silently in a corner clutching a plastic cup, was mortifying. The pressure was immense. He knew she just wanted him to have fun, to be a part of her world. But for him, a party was a battlefield, and he was armed with nothing but a sketchbook full of people he'd rather be. If I could just wear a mask, he thought, the idea taking root like a stubborn weed. If I could just be someone else for one night. It was a fantasy he often entertained, the ultimate escape. A mask wasn't just a costume, it was a shield. It was a new face. Haunted by the thought, he abandoned his drawing desk. The city streets, usually a source of overwhelming sensory input, felt different today. He was on a quest. He ignored the garish, plastic-wrapped costumes in the seasonal pop-up shops, the cheap rubber masks of monsters and politicians. He wanted something different, something unique, something that didn't feel like a joke. That's when he saw it. Tucked between a vape shop and a laundromat, it was a storefront he'd passed 1,000 times, but never truly noticed. The windows were layered with so much grime they were nearly opaque, and a faded, hand-painted sign read, "Thorns, Curiosities, and Antiquities." It looked less like a shop and more like a place where forgotten things went to die. It was perfect. A small bell chimed as he pushed open the heavy wooden door, the sound immediately swallowed by the suffocating silence within. The air was thick with the scent of dust, decaying paper, and something else, something metallic and vaguely sweet, like old blood. The shop was a labyrinth of towering shelved and cluttered tables, a hoarder's paradise where shadows clung to every corner. Sunlight struggled to pierce the grimy windows, illuminating dancing dust motes in weak, hazy shafts. An old man emerged from the gloom behind a counter, moving with a slow, deliberate shuffle that seemed to defy the frantic pace of the world outside. He was ancient, his skin like wrinkled parchment stretched over a fragile skull. Thin, white hair was combed over a spotted scalp, and his eyes, buried in deep sockets, were a pale, watery blue. They fixed on Leo with an unnerving, predatory stillness. He seemed less a shopkeeper and more a relic that had sprouted from the floorboards. "Lookin' for something," the man rasped, his voice like stones grinding together. Yeah, a mask," Leo stammered, his voice feeling small and intrusive in the heavy silence. "For Halloween." The old man, who Leo presumed was Elias Thorne, offered a slow, deliberate blink. He didn't reply, simply gesturing with a bony hand towards the suffocating clutter of the shop. The invitation was clear: look for yourself. Leo ventured into the maze. He passed taxidermied animals with glassy eyes, tarnished silver tea sets, and dolls with cracked porcelain faces that seemed to follow his every move. The feeling of being watched was immense, and he was sure it wasn't just the old man's doing. In a back corner, almost completely hidden under a yellow dusty sheet, he saw the corner of a wooden box. It felt different from the other junk, possessing a kind of quiet dignity. He pulled the sheet away, sending a cloud of dust into the air that made him cough. There it was. It was a mask, resting on a bed of faded velvet. It was simple, elegant, and arrestingly beautiful. Made of what looked like smooth white porcelain, it was subtly androgynous, with clean, sculpted lines that were almost unnervingly perfect. The cheeks were smooth, the nose straight, the lips carved into a faint, enigmatic smile that seemed to hold a secret. It was the smile of someone who knows more than you, who was calmer, more confident, more complete. It was a Mona Lisa smile, but colder, more detached. There were no straps, no strings, just the perfect, hollowed-out face. It seemed to call to him, a silent promise of transformation. This wasn't a costume. This was an identity. He picked it up. The porcelain was cool to the touch, but a strange, subtle warmth bloomed in his palms as he held it, a low hum of energy that felt almost alive. "I'll take this one," Leo said, carrying it back to the counter as if it were a holy relic. Elias Thorne's pale eyes flickered from Leo to the mask, and a look of strange, knowing comprehension passed over his ancient features. He didn't seem surprised. He reached for the mask, his garned fingers tracing its smooth surface with a familiarity that sent a shiver down Leo's spine. "An interesting choice," the old man rasped. He began to wrap it carefully in brown paper and twine, his movements slow and ritualistic. As he worked, he looked up, his gaze locking with Leo's. A face is a choice. Be careful which one you choose to show the world. He paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Some are hard to take off. Leo managed a nervous laugh, the sound dying quickly in the oppressive atmosphere. He figured the old man was just a theatrical eccentric, playing up the mystique of his dusty wares. "I'll keep that in mind." He paid the small sum Elias requested, the transaction feeling more like an exchange of secrets than currency. As the shopkeeper placed the wrapped package into his hands, the mask felt strangely, impossibly warm through the paper. Leo couldn't wait to get out of the shop, back into the noise and the light of the city. He pushed the door open and stepped onto the sidewalk, the bell chiming his departure. He didn't look back, but he could feel Elias Thorne's pale eyes watching him until he was swallowed by the crowd. Halloween night descended upon the city, cloaking it in a festive, electric gloom. The air was crisp and carried the scent of fallen leaves and distant bonfires. From his apartment window, Leo could see an endless parade of ghouls, superheroes, and witches making their way through the streets. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel the familiar pang of exclusion. He felt a thrill of anticipation, a nervous energy that was closer to excitement than dread. The wrapped mask sat on his desk, a silent, promising monolith. He'd spent an hour sketching, trying to lose himself in his work, but his focus was shot. The enigmatic smile of the porcelain face was burned into his mind. Finally, he gave in. He stood before the full-length mirror leaning against his wall, the brown paper package in his hands. His reflection stared back at him, the same hesitant eyes, the same awkward posture. Tonight, that person would disappear. With trembling fingers, he untied the twine and unfolded the paper. The mask looked even more perfect in the warm light of his apartment. It seemed to glow, its smooth white surface almost luminous. He held it up, his own plain face reflected faintly in its polished sheen. This was it, the choice. He lifted the mask and pressed it to his face. The sensation was instantaneous and overwhelming. A jolt, like a current of ice-cold electricity, shot from the point of contact, spreading through every nerve in his body. It wasn't painful, it was exhilarating. A gasp escaped his lips, but it felt like it came from someone else's lungs. The oppressive weight of his social anxiety, a companion so constant he barely noticed it anymore, simply evaporated. It was as if a heavy, suffocating blanket had been lifted, allowing him to breathe for the first time. In its place, a smooth, articulate confidence flooded his mind. The million tiny worries that usually buzzed in his head, what will I say, what if they don't like me, do I look stupid, were gone, replaced by a profound, unshakable calm. He opened his eyes and looked in the mirror. The effect was staggering. The mask fit perfectly, seamlessly. It didn't look like a mask sitting on his skin. It looked like it was his skin. The eye holes were perfectly aligned, and his own brown eyes, looking out, seemed different. They were brighter, sharper, holding a new, confident gleam. He tilted his head. The faint, enigmatic smile on the porcelain lips seemed to mock the insecure boy who had been standing there only moments before. He felt powerful. He felt complete. With this face, he could do anything. He arrived at the party, and for the first time, he didn't hesitate at the door, paralyzed by the wall of sound and people. He walked in. The apartment was a chaotic sea of bodies, pulsating music and flashing lights. Usually, this would have been his personal hell. Tonight, it was his kingdom. He spotted Chloe across the room, dressed as a 1920s flapper, laughing with a group of people. He didn't feel the usual surge of panic, the urge to retreat. Instead, he felt a magnetic pull, an effortless certainty. He moved through the crowd with a grace he'd never possessed, a man on a mission. "I was beginning to think you'd bail," Chloe said, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. Then she took in the mask. "Whoa, Leo, that's incredible. Where did you get it?" "A gentleman shouldn't reveal all his secrets," he replied, the words flowing from his lips with a smoothness that shocked him. His voice was his own, yet it had a deeper, more resonant timbre, laced with a charismatic charm he didn't recognize. Chloe's eyebrows shot up in surprise, a delighted smile spreading across her face. "Well, look at you, getting into character." The transformation was total. The mask wasn't a costume, it was a conduit. He was no longer Leo, the shy artist. He was this new persona, witty, charming, captivating. He moved from group to group, a social butterfly emerging from its cocoon. He told stories that had people hanging on his every word. He made jokes that landed perfectly, eliciting peals of laughter. He debated politics with a sharp, insightful wit, and discussed art with a passionate authority that commanded respect. Everyone wanted to talk to him. He was the center of gravity in every room he entered. He danced. He, Leo, who considered moving his feet in time with music a form of public torture, danced with a fluid, confident energy that drew eyes. He pulled Chloe onto the makeshift dance floor, and for the first time, he didn't stumble over his own feet or hers. He led her through spins and dips, his new persona laughing, enjoying the moment, completely unburdened by self-consciousness. "I've never seen you like this," Chloe shouted over the music, her face flushed with excitement and surprise. "It's amazing. I always knew this guy was in there somewhere." Her words were a shot of pure validation. This was who he was supposed to be. For the first time, he felt like the hero of his own story, not a background character scribbled into the margins. He was living inside one of his own comics, the protagonist who finally gets his powers. This was the best night of his life. Hours bled into one another. The party swirled around him in a haze of music, laughter, and admiring glances. The confidence the mask gave him was a potent drug, and he was high on it. But as the night wore on and the apartment grew hotter and more crowded, he felt a need for a moment of peace, a breath of fresh air. He needed to feel his own skin again, if only for a minute. He excused himself and made his way to the bathroom, the short journey an obstacle course of discarded cups and tangled limbs. He closed the door, the sudden quiet a jarring contrast to the party's roar. He leaned against the sink, his heart pounding from the dancing and the adrenaline. He looked at the flawless white face in the mirror, the faint smile seeming to mock him. It was time for a break. He reached up and hooked his fingers under the edge of the mask near his jawline and pulled. It didn't move. A flicker of confusion. He readjusted his grip, digging his fingernails in slightly and pulled harder. The mask remained firmly in place, as if it were glued to his skin. A small, cold knot of unease began to form in his stomach. He told himself it was just sweat and the tight, perfect fit. The apartment was hot. He'd been dancing for hours. It's suction, that's all. He splashed cold water on his face, letting it run over the smooth porcelain. He tried again, pulling with more force this time. The only sensation was a sharp, pulling ache on his skin beneath, but the mask itself didn't budge a millimeter. It felt stuck, fused. He stared at his reflection, the smiling mask staring back. The initial calm confidence he'd felt all night began to fray at the edges, replaced by the first threads of genuine panic. He could feel his heart rate accelerating. It's fine, he told himself, his internal voice sounding distant and unconvincing. It'll come off when I get home. I'll just deal with it then. He took a deep, shaky breath, straightened his posture, and forced the charming, enigmatic smile to feel like his own again. He opened the bathroom door and walked back into the party, the cold knot in his stomach tightening into a ball of ice. The sun sliced through a gap in his blinds, a merciless, accusatory blade of light that fell across his face. Leo groaned, his head pounding with a dull, rhythmic hangover. Fragments of the previous night flickered through his mind like a broken film reel. Laughter, dancing, the feeling of Chloe's hand in his, the astonished, admiring faces of strangers. A slow smile spread across his lips. It had worked. He had been the person he always dreamed of being. He felt a lingering echo of that intoxicating confidence, a warm thrum beneath the surface of the hangover. He swung his legs out of bed, the floorboards cold beneath his feet, and shuffled towards the bathroom. It was time to finally peel off last night's hero and face his own familiar reflection. He was still smiling as he flicked on the light and leaned over the sink, his eyes bleary. The smile vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed emptiness. The mask was still there. But it was no longer a mask. The horror began not with a sudden shock, but with a slow, creeping, impossible realization. There was no seam. There was no edge. The line where the cool porcelain should have met his skin was gone. He frantically ran his fingertips along his jawline, his temples, his forehead. He felt nothing but a single, continuous, impossibly smooth surface. The white porcelain had blended perfectly, seamlessly, into his flesh. It wasn't sitting on his skin. It was his skin. His face was the mask. His breath hitched in his throat. A strangled gasp escaped his lips. This wasn't possible. It was a dream, a hungover hallucination. He slapped his cheeks. The sound was a dull, ceramic thwack. A stinging, sharp pain radiated from the impact, real and undeniable, but the surface beneath his palm remained hard and unyielding. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. It was a tidal wave, drowning the last vestiges of his drunken euphoria. He clawed at his face, his fingernails scraping uselessly against the porcelain. The sound was horrific, like nails on a chalkboard, a dry, scratching cacophony that filled the small bathroom. He pulled and tore, his own frantic grunts and whimpers the only other sound. There was nothing to grip, nothing to pry. It was like trying to peel off his own skull. He stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He stared into the mirror, at the face that was his and not his. The enigmatic, half-smiling expression that had seemed so charming and powerful last night was now a grotesque, permanent fixture of his own anatomy. He tried to scream, but the sound was thin and reedy, trapped behind the immovable lips of his new face. Tears welled in his eyes, his real eyes, the only part of him that still felt like his own, and streamed down the flawless white cheeks, leaving no trace. Desperation took over. He lurched into his kitchen, his mind a maelstrom of terror. He turned on the faucet, blasting hot water, and stuck his face under the scalding stream. He scrubbed with soap, with a dish scourer, the abrasive material screeching against the porcelain, but doing nothing. He saw a bottle of olive oil on the counter and frantically smeared it over his face, hoping to lubricate the edges. But there were no edges. His hands just slipped over the smooth, immutable surface. He ransacked his toolbox, his hands shaking so violently he could barely grip the tools. He returned to the bathroom, a flathead screwdriver clutched in his white-knuckled fist. He looked at his reflection, at the serene, smiling monster staring back, and with a sob of pure terror, he tried to pry it off. He jammed the tip of the screwdriver where his hairline met the porcelain and pushed. A sharp, searing pain shot through his skull, 1,000 times worse than just pulling. He felt his own skin tear beneath the fused layer, but the mask didn't move. He screamed in agony and frustration, dropping the screwdriver into the sink with a clatter. And then he saw it. A tiny, hairline scratch on the porcelain near his temple, where the screwdriver had slipped. A mark, proof that it could be damaged. But as he watched, his breath held in a terrified knot, the tiny black line seemed to shimmer. It grew fainter, shallower, and then, over the course of 10 impossible seconds, it vanished completely. The porcelain healed itself, leaving behind the same flawless, unbroken finish as before. A profound, soul-crushing despair washed over him. This wasn't a mask. It was a part of him, a parasitic growth, a new layer of his own anatomy. He slid down the wall, his back against the cool tile, and pulled his knees to his chest. He sat there for hours, staring at nothing, his mind a hollow chamber of echoes. When he finally found the strength to look in the mirror again, he noticed something new, something that made the blood in his veins turn to ice. The mask's expression had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The faint, enigmatic smile seemed wider now, more self-satisfied. It was the smirk of a conqueror. And his own eyes, staring out from the perfectly sculpted holes, seemed different too. The fear was still there, deep down, but on the surface they held a new light. They were brighter, colder, and terrifyingly more confident. The mask wasn't just a face, it was a presence, and it was pleased. The days that followed were a waking nightmare, a surreal blend of abject terror and bizarre, unwanted success. Leo didn't leave his apartment for a week. He called in sick to his freelance clients, his new, smooth voice a foreign entity in his own ears. He spent hours in front of the mirror, studying the alien landscape of his new face, searching for any sign of his old self. There was none. The porcelain was a permanent, living part of him. When he pricked it with a needle, a clear, viscous fluid oozed out before it healed over. It was alive. But the most terrifying change wasn't physical. The confidence he'd felt at the party hadn't left. The constant, gnawing hum of social anxiety that had been the soundtrack to his entire life was gone, replaced by a preternatural calm. The thought of going outside, of interacting with people, no longer filled him with dread. It filled him with curiosity. Hunger and dwindling finances finally forced him out. He pulled on a hoodie, cinching it tight around his face, and stepped into the city. But the urge to hide felt weak, vestigial. After a few blocks, he found himself pulling the hood down. He walked down the street, and for the first time, he didn't feel invisible. People noticed him. Their eyes would catch on his face, their expressions shifting from curiosity to a kind of intrigued admiration. His face was a piece of art, beautiful and strange. They didn't see a monster. They saw a mystery. He went into a coffee shop, a place where he usually stammered his order and fled. Today, he walked to the counter and smiled, or rather, his face smiled for him. The barista, a girl with bright pink hair he'd always been too intimidated to even make eye contact with, smiled back, her cheeks flushing slightly. "That's an amazing look," she said, her gaze fixed on his flawless features. "It's just the face I was born with," he replied, the words effortlessly cool. He charmed her, made her laugh, and left with his coffee and her phone number scrawled on a napkin. The interaction left him feeling dizzy, a cocktail of horror at his own lie and a thrilling rush of power. This new, unwanted gift began to bleed into his professional life. He had a meeting with a senior editor at a major comic book publisher, an appointment he had been dreading for months. He'd planned to let his portfolio do the talking. But when he sat down in the sleek, intimidating office, it wasn't the old Leo who was present. The persona, as he had started to call the presence behind his new face, took over. He pitched his ideas with a fiery charisma he never possessed. He was articulate, persuasive, and utterly confident. He didn't just present his art, he sold a vision. He walked out of the meeting with a contract for a 6-issue series. It was the break he had been dreaming of his entire life. But the price of this new confidence was terrifyingly high. His old personality was being systematically suppressed, suffocated under the weight of the new one. He would sit at his drawing table, his sanctuary, and find his attention wandering. The quiet, meticulous joy he'd once found in the stroke of a pen now felt like a chore. The persona was bored by solitude. It craved interaction, admiration, the social energy it had feasted on at the party. It wanted to go out, to be seen, to conquer. His empathy, the very thing that made his art so resonant, felt dulled, muted. He watched a sad movie and felt nothing. He read a tragic news story and felt only a distant, intellectual curiosity. His emotions were being replaced by the mask's cool, charismatic, and chillingly hollow surface. He was becoming a beautifully crafted, empty vessel. Chloe was the first to see the cracks, not in the porcelain, but in the man. She was thrilled when he told her about the comic contract, hugging him tightly. But as they talked, her initial excitement gave way to a subtle, growing unease. "You're different, Leo," she said, studying his face. She had accepted his bizarre story that it was an experimental, semi-permanent cosmetic prosthetic, a lie the persona had spun with incredible ease. I replied with a charming smile. "I don't know," she said, her brow furrowed. "You're so polished. Your sense of humor is sharper, I guess, but it's crueler too." They went for a walk a few days later, and he made a cutting, witty remark about a stranger on the street. It was objectively funny, and a few weeks ago, a part of him might have thought it, but he never would have said it. Chloe flinched. "That's not you, Leo," she said quietly. "The Leo I know wouldn't say that." The gentle, sensitive artist she loved was gone, replaced by this cold, charming stranger. Her gaze lingered on his new, flawless face, a look of dawning horror in her eyes. "It's like you're still wearing a mask, Leo." Her words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Beneath the calm, porcelain exterior, the real Leo, the small, terrified part of him that was still trapped inside, screamed. She saw it. She knew. He wanted to confess everything, to break down and tell her the horrifying truth, but the persona wouldn't allow it. It smoothed over the moment with a placating remark and a disarming smile, guiding the conversation to safer waters. But a seed of suspicion had been planted, and the chill that went through him had nothing to do with the autumn air. It was the cold dread of being seen and of not being recognized at all. The chill of Chloe's words lingered, a haunting echo in the hollow space where his old self used to be. He had to find Elias Thorne. The old man knew what this thing was. His cryptic warning was no longer theatrical, but a prophecy fulfilled. Leo rushed back to the grimy side street, his heart pounding with a desperate hope, only to find it crushed. The antique shop was gone. The windows were scrubbed clean, and a bright orange for lease sign was plastered on the glass. The place had been gutted, leaving no trace of the dusty labyrinth or its ancient keeper. Elias Thorne had vanished, as if he had never been there at all. He was alone with this thing on his face. The nights became the worst. Sleep offered no escape, only a different kind of horror. He was plagued by nightmares, not of monsters or falling, but of a profound, suffocating emptiness. He dreamed he was in a vast, dark, silent space. In front of him stood a perfect white porcelain copy of his own face, featureless except for the eyes and mouth. As he watched, his real face, the one he could no longer remember clearly, began to crumble. It didn't rot or decay, it simply turned to fine gray dust, flaking away piece by piece until nothing was left. All the while, the impassive mask watched, its enigmatic smile unwavering. He would wake up with a silent scream caught in his throat, his hands clutching a face that wasn't his, the smooth porcelain cool against his terrified fingertips. Driven by a terror that was beginning to outweigh the persona's cool detachment, Leo turned to the only place he could, the internet. He spent days locked in his apartment, diving into the deepest, most obscure corners of digital folklore, mythology, and occult forums. He typed in search terms that felt insane: living mask, fused to skin, personality parasite, hungry porcelain. Most of it was fiction, creative writing prompts, and dead ends. But then, buried in a digitized university archive of European folklore, he found it. It was a barely legible translation of a collection of pre-Christian myths. It spoke of Vultus Vorax, or the hungry faces. They weren't spirits or demons, but ancient symbiotic artifacts, dormant organisms of unknown origin. The text described how these artifacts would lie dormant for centuries, waiting for a host vessel consumed by insecurity and a desperate desire for a new identity. The Vultus Vorax would bond with the host, granting them a new idealized persona: charisma, confidence, beauty, everything the host felt they lacked. But it came at a terrible cost. The artifact was a parasite. It fed on the social energy and validation the host generated. The more the host was admired, the stronger the persona became. In return for this gift, it consumed the host's original identity, their memories, their empathy, their very soul, until nothing was left but the beautiful, hollow shell. The words on the screen swam before his eyes. It wasn't just a theory, it was a diagnosis. He was being eaten from the inside out. The realization recontextualized everything. The persona's desire to socialize wasn't just a personality quirk, it was hunger. The contract he'd won, the barista's phone number, the admiration of strangers at the party, it was all food. The mask was a symbiote, and he was the fuel. It was erasing his old self to make more room for its own existence. He tried to fight back. He forced himself to look at old photographs, at the awkward, smiling boy with the messy brown hair. He felt a horrifying sense of detachment, a clinical unrecognition, as if he were looking at a stranger from a forgotten history book. He pulled out his old sketchbooks, his most personal self-portraits, the raw, honest drawings that captured his anxieties and dreams. He felt nothing. The emotional connection was severed.
The persona looked upon them with disdain, the work of a weak, pathetic creature it had replaced. The physical changes were becoming more pronounced. The mask was not inert. When he spoke, he could feel it subtly shift and mold itself to form more convincing, nuanced expressions, a thoughtful frown, a wry smirk, a look of feigned sympathy. It was learning, adapting, becoming a more perfect mimic of a human face. It was growing stronger. And as it grew, Leo felt himself fading, his consciousness becoming a smaller and smaller prisoner in the back of his own skull, watching as a stranger lived his life, wore his clothes, and answered to his name.
The persona's cold charisma, the very quality that had brought Leo his newfound success, became the wedge that finally drove Chloe away. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening in her apartment. She had made dinner, an attempt to reconnect with the friend she felt was slipping through her fingers. She was telling him about a problem at work, her voice filled with genuine hurt and frustration over a colleague's betrayal. The old Leo would have listened with quiet empathy. He would have offered comfort, maybe not with perfect words, but with a palpable sense of shared feeling. The persona, however, saw the situation as a puzzle to be solved, an emotional weakness to be dissected. Well, from a strategic standpoint, you were outmaneuvered, it said, its voice calm and analytical. Showing that much vulnerability in a competitive environment is a tactical error. You should have anticipated it. The words hung in the air, cold and sharp as shards of glass. Chloe stared at him, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. The hurt in her eyes was swiftly replaced by a stunned, rising anger. "A tactical error?" she repeated, her voice dangerously quiet. "Leo, I'm talking about my friend, someone I trusted, stabbing me in the back, and you're giving me a corporate Machiavelli lesson?" "I'm just being objective," the persona replied smoothly, its porcelain face fixed in an expression of patient reason. Emotion clouds judgment. "I don't want judgment. I want my friend," she finally exploded, pushing her chair back. "I want the friend who would get angry for me, not tell me I was stupid for trusting someone. I don't know who you are anymore, but you are not Leo." Her voice cracked on his name. "The man I know is kind and gentle, and he feels things. You're just a beautiful, empty shell." Her rejection, so raw and absolute, was a powerful emotional blow unlike any the persona had ever encountered. It wasn't the fleeting envy of a stranger or the mild professional disagreement with an editor. This was a deep, personal severing from the one person whose opinion had ever truly mattered to the original Leo. It was a direct hit to the very foundation of his old self. For the first time since he'd put on the mask, a genuine, powerful emotion broke through the persona's cold control. It was not confidence or charisma. It was the old, familiar, gut-wrenching pain of loss and self-loathing. It was Leo's pain. He, the real he, felt a flash of his own genuine sorrow, a wave of agony for having hurt her, for having lost her. In that moment of pure, unadulterated anguish, he stumbled back and caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. And he saw it. A tiny hairline crack appeared on the mask's perfect right cheek. It was almost invisible, but it was there, a dark, jagged line on the flawless white surface. The entity was vulnerable. The realization hit him with the force of a lightning bolt. It fed on confidence, on admiration, on positive social energy. It was damaged by his original negative emotions. Insecurity, sorrow, shame, self-hatred. These were poison to it. The mask, sensing the breach in its defenses, tried to reassert control. A wave of cold, detached confidence washed over him, a powerful urge to say something witty and dismissive, to win the argument, to smooth things over and regain the upper hand. The persona's instincts were screaming at him to belittle her pain, to turn the tables, to feed on the power of the confrontation. "You're being overly emotional," a voice in his head, the persona's voice, suggested. "She's weak. You're better off without her."
But for the first time, another voice fought back. It was his voice, weak and trembling, but there. No, she's right. He was at war with his own face. The two consciousnesses battled for control, a silent, violent struggle within his skull. The persona pushed for dominance, for survival, but Leo, fueled by the pain of Chloe's rejection and the first glimmer of hope, pushed back. He clung to the sorrow, to the shame, to the memory of the kind person he used to be. The tiny crack on his face was a battle line, and for the first time, he had a weapon to fight back with. He turned and fled Chloe's apartment without another word, leaving her standing there amidst the ruins of their friendship, the persona's witty retort dying on his unmoving lips. He ran into the rain, a single horrifying, beautiful thought consuming him. I can kill it.
The cold rain plastered his hair to his forehead as he ran, but he barely felt it. He couldn't pry the mask off. He couldn't cut it off. He had to kill it. He had to starve it of its food, the admiration and confidence it craved, and overwhelm it with the very emotions it was designed to suppress. He had to stop being the persona and fully, brutally embrace the flawed, anxious, and heartbroken man it had tried to erase. He had to perform a ritual of radical, painful self-acceptance. His art studio, the heart of his original identity, would be the battleground. He burst into his apartment, drenched and gasping, and locked the door. He didn't turn on the lights. The room was illuminated by the chaotic glow of the city outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The persona was fighting him, flooding his mind with feelings of power and superiority, trying to convince him this was all a mistake, that he was throwing away the greatest gift he'd ever received. He ignored it. His war began. He tore through his own history, gathering his weapons. He pulled out every piece of failed artwork, the awkward anatomy studies, the clumsy character designs, the panels he'd redrawn a dozen times and still hated. He plastered them on the walls, a gallery of his own perceived inadequacies. He found his stack of rejection letters from publishers, the polite, sterile words that had once felt like daggers to his heart, and scattered them across the floor. He dug out old photo albums, flipping to pictures of himself in his most awkward phases, the pimply teenager with braces, the lanky college student drowning in an oversized hoodie. He surrounded himself with a fortress of his own insecurity. Finally, he dragged his large, full-length mirror to the center of the room and stood before it. The face that stared back was a canvas of calm perfection, marred by that single, beautiful crack. The persona was fighting hard, projecting an aura of unflappable charisma. It wanted him to see a winner, a success. Leo saw a monster. He ignored the siren song of confidence and began to speak aloud, his voice raw and shaking in the quiet room. He spoke not to the mask, but to himself, the prisoner trapped behind it. "My name is Leo," he started, the words feeling foreign and monumental. "I'm a comic book artist, and I'm afraid of people." As he spoke the admission, a second crack splintered from the first, racing towards his eye. The persona recoiled. A jolt of something like pain, cold and sharp, shot through his face. He felt it try to push a confident thought into his mind. "You're not afraid, you're powerful." He pushed back harder. "I'm terrified of what people think of me," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I've spent my whole life hiding, thinking that if anyone saw the real me, they wouldn't like me." He pointed to a clumsy drawing of a superhero he'd made when he was 15. "I drew heroes because I felt weak. I drew confident people because I felt invisible." Another crack appeared, this one spiderwebbing across the porcelain forehead. The mask's serene smile now looked like a grimace of pain. He grabbed a photo of Chloe, her bright, honest smile a beacon in the gloom. Tears, his real tears, began to stream from his eyes, tracing paths down the unfeeling porcelain.
I love her, he choked out. And I let this thing hurt her. I pushed her away because I was too scared to be myself. He looked at his reflection, at the cold, beautiful monster. I'm sorry, Chloe. I'm so sorry for what I've become. The apology, an act of pure, selfless remorse, was like a hammer blow. A network of deep fissures exploded across the surface of the mask. He could feel it weakening, its control slipping. He felt a wave of his old familiar social anxiety, the tightness in his chest, the urge to run and hide. This time, he welcomed it like a long-lost friend. It was his. It was real. He confronted his deepest fear, the core of all his insecurity, the reason he had taken the mask in the first place. I'm afraid, he whispered to the cracked face in the mirror, that I'm not good enough, that I'm unlovable as I truly am. As the words left his lips, a final, deafening crack echoed through the room. The web of fissures connected, and with a final, agonizing, tearing sensation that felt like his own skin was being ripped from his skull, the mask shattered. It fell away from his face not in one piece, but in 1,000 white shards that cascaded down his chest and tinkled onto the wooden floor. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, his hands flying to his face. He felt skin, his skin. It was raw, tear-streaked and tender, but it was his. He looked at his hands, then back at the mirror. Staring back at him was a stranger he knew better than anyone. His own face, beautifully, wonderfully imperfect, streaked with tears and etched with pain. He was free.
In the aftermath, the silence in the apartment was absolute. Leo knelt amidst the glittering debris of his prison, his breathing ragged. He was raw, exposed, and utterly, achingly himself. The phantom confidence of the persona was gone, replaced by the familiar, humming anxiety he had known his whole life. It felt like coming home. He carefully gathered the porcelain shards of the mask. They were inert now, just broken pieces of ceramic, their internal glow extinguished. There was no magic left in them, only the memory of a nightmare. He swept them into a dustpan, carried them to the alley behind his building, and dumped them into the bottom of a grimy, overflowing dumpster. He was free. The next day, he went to see Chloe. There was no grand, charismatic speech, no perfectly crafted apology. The persona was gone, and with it, the silver tongue. He stood on her doorstep, awkward and shy, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. When she opened the door, her expression was guarded, hurt. "Leo? I'm sorry," he stammered, his eyes fixed on his shoes. "Everything you said, you were right. That wasn't me. I got lost, and I was cruel to you, and I'm so sorry." He finally looked up at her, his face completely, vulnerably honest. "I miss my friend." She looked at him for a long moment, really looked at him. She saw the familiar flicker of anxiety in his eyes, the slight, awkward hunch of his shoulders. She saw the real Leo, the one she had been mourning. A slow, tentative smile touched her lips. Their relationship wouldn't be fixed overnight, but it had a chance to start again, on honest terms. The big comic book contract fell through. He had a follow-up meeting, and without the persona's aggressive charisma, he fumbled. He couldn't fake the bravado the editors had bought into. He was just Leo again, a talented artist, but a quiet, unassuming man. The loss stung, but it didn't break him. He returned to his art with a new, profound sense of purpose. He stopped trying to draw the powerful, untouchable heroes he thought the world wanted. Instead, he started drawing quiet, introspective, personal stories. He drew about anxiety, about loneliness, about the masks people wear every day. His art became more honest, more vulnerable, and more brilliant than ever before. Months later, Leo stood in a crowded, noisy art gallery. The walls were covered with his work, the new, honest work.
The show was a surprise success, lauded by critics for its raw emotional depth. He was a little nervous, a familiar knot tightening in his stomach, but he was managing. Chloe was by his side, her hand resting gently on his arm. He was okay. He caught his reflection in the gallery window. It was just him, his plain face looking a little anxious in the crowd, but real, authentically, imperfectly his. Then he saw something across the crowded room that made his blood run cold. In a far corner, half hidden by a sculpture, stood a young person. They clutched a drink, their eyes wide with the familiar look of someone lost and overwhelmed, a ghost at the party. And standing just behind them, just out of their line of sight, was a tall, unnervingly familiar old man in a dusty overcoat. He was holding a small cloth-wrapped object. The man, Elias Thorne, looked up, as if sensing Leo's gaze from across the room. Their eyes met. A slow, reptilian smile spread across the ancient man's face, a smile of recognition, of shared conspiracy. He gave Leo a slow, deliberate nod, then turned his attention back to the shy, lonely-looking soul beside him, beginning to offer his terrible, beautiful gift. Leo's face filled with horror. He hadn't destroyed the mask, he had just returned it to circulation. The cycle wasn't broken, a new host had been found. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.